go to the forest at 3 a.m. The first time Mara saw the warning, it was stitched into the hem of her grandmother's favorite apron. 3 uneven letters, red thread dulled by time. Don't go to the forest at 3 a.m. It felt absurd, childish, like one of her grandmother's cautions against midnight walks, until the same words stared back at her from a jar lid, carved into the inside of a cupboard door, and whispered in a lullaby on a brittle cassette. The repetition settled into her like a cold tide. Curiosity, always sharper than fear, pried at the edges of that warning. She had come back for practical things, keys, signatures, a house to empty. But the village kept memory like a second weather, sudden, invasive. People watched differently here. They greeted her politely, but closed mouths when the forest came up. Tomas, the watchman, one hand always on his cap, offered a single piece of advice in a tone that did not invite questions. "Stay away at 3, he said, as though naming a storm. His stare lingered on the trees, and for the first time, Mara noticed how the watchtower's bell tower leaned toward the wood as if listening. The cassette tapes became her obsession. Found in a shoebox under a floorboard, each labeled with a date and a single word: evening, dinner, wind. She pressed play in the kitchen that smelled faintly of lavender and boiled vegetables. Voices leaked from the small speaker, her grandmother singing a lullaby in a voice lifted by memory, the hiss of tape, a pause, and then something that could be a second voice, or the wind organizing itself into words. It was never clear. Every time the recorder stuttered, the noise resolved into ordinary household sound, and then retreated. At night, clocks in the village misbehaved. The pocket clock she found among her grandmother's belongings kept snagging at 2:59, as if its hands were fingernails caught on fabric. Neighbors shrugged and called it a quirk of old mechanisms, but Mara noticed patterns. Streetlights dimmed in unison, dogs refused to answer doorways, and time itself felt slightly elastic, minutes stretching like breath, held too long. The sensation was worst near the edge of the trees, where the scent of damp loam carried a sweetness she couldn't place, like jars of preserved fruit left open. Curiosity turned to compulsion the night she followed a line of pebbles. They began at her grandmother's fence, tiny, deliberate stones threaded like breadcrumbs toward the woods. At first, she thought a child had been at play, but the pebbles were placed with an intent that felt older than mischief. Each one was warmed by daylight, and then cooled to a hush. Each lay at the precise angle of a footstep, as if someone had guided the path. She traced the line until it vanished into undergrowth, and for a moment, the trees seemed to hold their breath. Neighbors spoke of old ways, stories of a night watch, of elders who left offerings at the tree line, but details thinned under interrogation, slipping like mist. One woman, who had been a child the last time the village took the forest seriously, told Mara about a lullaby mothers used to hum to keep their children close at night. She hummed a fragment, and Mara felt the atmosphere tighten, the notes pressed against her like a fingerprint. The woman's eyes widened when she mentioned 3 o'clock, and then she smoothed her skirt, as if to pat away a memory that might stain. Mara began keeping a notebook, mapping times and tapes and pebbles. She wrote the dates in a cramped hand, connecting them with thin lines like the roots on an old map. When she played the tapes at exactly 2:58, the recorder hummed with a fidelity that made the ordinary seem thin. Voices layered and stepped out of themselves. A soft scraping at 2:59 would sound like a nail along wood, then pause. At 3:00, there was always a silence so complete it felt intentional. A door held closed for reasons someone else understood. When the watchtower bell creaked without wind, the village hushed in a way Mara had only ever heard in churches or before funerals. People drew curtains, lit extra lamps, and murmured the warning that had become a ritual. Don't go to the forest at 3 a.m. Tomas came to her door that evening with the bell's rope in his weathered hand and an apology in his eyes he kept short. Rules were made for reasons, he said, then lowered his voice. Once, things were coaxed back with song and small offerings. Not anymore. The tapes grew stranger as she cataloged them. Between lullabies and domestic noise, there were moments clipped like breaths. A voice that mirrored her own, an echo that finished her sentences, a child's laughter that didn't belong to any child she knew. Sometimes the recorder caught things impossible to place, the sound of textiles being smoothed, the scrape of a sewing needle, and the precise rhythm of someone counting stitches. The more she listened, the more she felt as if the tapes were rearranging memory, threading an old shape through the present. On the fourth night, she set a small camera at the fence where the ribbon fluttered and went to bed with the recorder in her pocket. The village clock struck 2 times, then 3, its voice cracking like wood bending. In the recordings afterward, there was a fragment she couldn't place, a soft footfall, then a whisper that matched the cadence of her grandmother's lullaby. But the vowels were wrong, stretched, and narrowing like a mouth, tasting something unfamiliar. She replayed it until the tape wore thin, each loop unraveling and reknotting the same unease. Mara decided to go at 2:45, to arrive before whatever happened, so she could watch it like a weather event. She wrapped her grandmother's scarf around her neck and pocketed the recorder, thinking she might catch a stitch of the echo that had been stealing the village's breath. The path into the trees smelled of leaf mold and preserved fruit. The pebble line reappeared, tidy and patient. As the minutes slotted into place, she felt the world compress, every small sound magnified. A moth's wing, a twig, the distant creak of the watchtower siding. At 2:59, the air shifted. The leaves hushed, and the forest seemed to realign itself around a center Mara could not see. A sound rose, not quite a voice, not quite music, and it braided with the lullabies on her tapes. It was close enough to feel like breath, distant enough to keep its shape ambiguous. The recorder in her pocket felt warm against her hip. She thought she heard her name, folded inside the melody, as if the wind had learned to imitate the cadence of people it had once known. When the clock struck 3, every bird stopped mid-breathe, and the hush became a tangible thing folding the world. Mara raised the recorder, compelled to document what might be a trick of geography or a slippage of the mind. For a heartbeat, there was a sensation of being watched by something that had learned to be patient. Then the hush spoke, not with violence, but with insistence. It arranged her grandmother's lullaby into a phrase that made no language she knew. The recorder captured the pattern. The tape's hiss made the syllables feel older than human memory. She ran then, back toward the village with the tape as proof, and the ribbon grasped in a cold hand. Branches snagged her coat, the pebble trail dissolved underfoot. Behind her, she heard the lullaby rearrange itself into something like laughter, not cruel, but terribly precise, as if a machine were testing a smile. By the time she burst into the lane, lamps were lit, and neighbors stood with doors ajar, their faces pale in a way that matched the bell tower silhouette. Tomas met her halfway, expression unreadable. They listened to the tape in the watchtower, the little room smelling of dust and old rope. The speakers played the lullaby, the breath, and at the end, a pattern of syllables not belonging to any of them. Tomas ran a hand over his face, and for the first time, Mara saw the fatigue of someone who had kept a thing at bay by sheer attention. "It remembers what it learned," he said. "We used to give it songs and small things. Over time, it asked for names." The watchtower's cracked window held the forest like a dark page pressed shut. They argued about what to do. Leave offerings, burn the tapes, move away. The village had dwindled before. Leaving felt like conceding a fact of the world they were not ready to accept. Mara wanted to rip the tape and unhear the thing she'd recorded. Instead, she copied it and set the original in the shoebox under the floorboard. That night, as she lay under a blanket that smelled of lavender and old linen, she imagined the lullaby rearranging itself into instructions she could not decode. Sleep came thin and tremulous. Weeks later, the village began to unspool in small ways. A neighbor's hen vanished, a weathered sign came undone, and an old tree that had held ribbons for 40 years threw its leaves in a single gust outside the time of year. People took their things to markets and left in pairs, casting last glances at the forest like lovers leaving their final address. Mara prepared to go too, tape copied, notes in her pocket, the warning folded into her heart like a pressed flower. At the last moment, she hesitated, foolish with attachments, and walked to the fence one more time. She unhooked the ribbon and left it fluttering on the post, a last token of resistance. In the shoebox, she left a copy of the tape with a small note in her grandmother's script. "Remember to sing." As the bus took her away, the watchtower shrank, the bells broke in silhouette against the trees. She listened to the copied tape one more time, and at the very end, beneath a whisper that matched her own name, there came a pause, then a single syllable that might have been a warning or an invitation, or simply a sound the woods like to keep. It repeated once, infinite and calm.